Peasants, Unhinge, and Women's Revenge. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is December 4th, 2020. And on this date in 1791, the first newspaper was started, and that was the Observer in Great Britain. So, if you didn't know that, I guess it's news to you. Attractive face, no extra charge. And happy day to everyone today. Today is the day we start the French Revolution. This becomes a model for all revolutions to come. So, a couple things for us to think about as we're moving into this. First, what interactions and factors brought about the French Revolution? Okay, so basically, why did it happen? Okay. Two, what did the various phases accomplish? Each one of them do something different, and they become more and more radical as time goes on. Number three, how and why did it become violent after 1791? Okay. And then last but not least, how did Napoleon uphold and fail to uphold the ideas of the French Revolution? Okay. He does a lot of innovative things, and some things that still influence the United States to this day, even though he was in France. Anyway. And here we go. So, social causes of the French Revolutions. Okay. Actually, it's probably pretty accurate, even though I didn't mean to say revolutions, to say French revolutions. Okay, so number one, you have the three estates. Okay, the clergy, the nobility, and then basically everyone else. The three estates had major social inequality, and this is a major cause of the revolution. Okay, uh, so just to kind of put things in perspective, only the poor people had to pay taxes in France, and that's going to cause a problem. So the first estate is the clergy or the church. It's 1% of the population, or about 130,000 of the people. They own 10% of all the French land, and they were exempt from the taille or the chief tax. They get about half of all the income of the crown. That's about 300 million lirs. The bishops and cardinals lived in palaces and townhomes. So the elite of the clergy lived very wealthy lives. Parish priests were normally poor commoners, but the important people in the church, again, lived like mini kings. We won't call them kings, but mini kings. Okay, the second estate. This is the aristocracy or nobles. 2% of the population. About 350,000 people. They owned about 25 to 30% of French land. So the top, really 3% of the population owned 40% of the land. Okay, the third estate bourgeoisie members could join the second estate, either by getting married or buying a government office. There were some very wealthy members of the third estate. Okay, and they were looked down on for not being members of the nobility or aristocracy. Okay, now 40% of the second estate had been added over the last 150 years. So a lot of people had bought into the second estate, and a lot of people had intermarried in it. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that they had to have money, and these were noble families that were starting to fall under, and people would buy in to get a share of the noble name. Okay, you have inherited privilege, so only the wealthy were allowed to hunt on common land. So, the average commoner was not able to go hunting on land and get meat. They were forced to, live a more subsistent life, and meat was something, a privilege, sometimes once a year that they would get their hands on. Uh, so if you're wealthy, you would wear certain types of clothing that would show that you were wealthy, and again, you were exempt from certain taxes, if not all taxes. Okay. Uh, the Ségur law actually is going to restrict military positions from third estate members for 4 generations. So even if you married in, it would still sometimes affect you for 3 or 4 generations after you moved in. depending on how well off your family was and how much you could buy off all the people in important positions. The third estate, there are anything from very wealthy merchants to landless serfs or laborers, or you know, this group is the peasants. Okay, so about 24 million people were in this group. Peasants were the largest class, about 75 to 80% of them. Okay, and they owned about 35 to 40% of the land. So 80% of the land is owned by everyone except for the very poor. Okay, many were landholders who they spent most of their time just managing their properties and renting them out to other people. They spent a lot of their time and money on taxes also, and tithes and feudal dues to the nobility that really controlled everything that happened. So even though they owned the land, they still had to pay to the titled people above them. That's one of the reasons for wanting to become nobility, was getting out of paying these feudal dues. Okay, bread prices were very expensive, and it was more expensive than wages could afford in many cases. Because of industrialization, cities were filled with unemployed and unskilled workers. A lot of people begging on the streets. So, impoverished people was a major problem, and having no place to go, and not having access to any way of getting out of it is going to cause a lot of problems. So, in the third estate, 8% of the population, this is a bourgeoisie, the very wealthy merchants, industrialists, and bankers. These are the wealthiest people that are in there. Okay, so this is kind of an extension of the nobility, but they don't get all of the privilege of the upper class. Okay, the petty bourgeoisie. These are artisans. People that made things, shopkeepers, small business owners, and a lot of them weren't really doing all that well, but they were making more money than the lower class people. Okay. The sans-culottes. These are people without breeches that were worn by the rich. They were a group that favored equality and radicalized the revolution. Most of them just wanted to get out of feudalism, but as they started to get a thirst for power and conquest, they kept pushing, and a lot of the violence is going to come from this group. So, political causes of the French Revolution. Part of this is to limit Bourbon absolutism. Okay, the Bourbons were the kings and the queens. Okay, so nobles created 15 regional law courts called parlements to reduce the king's ability to tax and legislate. Louis XV will get rid of this, but Louis XVI will bring it back. Okay, so again, part of this is the unchecked power of the throne and things that they did to try and regulate the king. The lettres de cachet allowed the king to arrest anyone without due process. So again, the king could arrest anyone, and there was nothing that they could do about it. Louis XVI, the heir to the Bourbon family, he really meant well, but he was very out of touch with the people, and he really looked like a weak man because his wife Marie Antoinette had a great number of affairs that made him look very, very weak. Okay, and this is one of the weaknesses that's pointed to, and when he's overthrown later and later executed, people still are mocking him for the lack of control over his household because of his promiscuous wife. Promiscuous girl, I already know, we're gonna be beheaded for the whole world. Promiscuous boy. Actually, he wasn't. Anyway, sorry, man. I really killed the momentum I had going. That was beautiful, and then nothing. Okay, anyway. Intellectual causes of the French Revolution. You have ideas from a lot of different philosophers: Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. A lot of the Enlightenment thoughts were kind of controlling the direction of everything that was going on. Uh, you have major scandals of the royal family, all the affairs being had by Marie Antoinette. Just they were no longer this group of people that you aspired to be, but they were kind of jokes and laughing stock, so it made it easier to overthrow them. So, anyway, okay, economic and financial causes of this. Okay, so French commerce explodes. It's 10 times higher between 1714 and 1789. So in a 75-year period, it expands. I mean, 10 times. That's incredible. Uh, the Farmers General collects taxes, but they still about 50% off the top. Okay, there's a lot of problem with corruption throughout France. Okay, uh, so half of the annual budget for France was spent paying interest on loans. Okay, kind of sounds a little bit like the U.S. today. And by 1787, France was about to go into bankruptcy. There was a shortage of food from horrible harvests. Again, bread prices were so expensive that the poor struggled to buy bread, and many of them went hungry on the streets. And nearly one third of France's population were extremely poor. Okay, so you have a large group of poor people, a lot of them landless, no place to go, no place to live. Okay, Anne Robert Jacques Turgot. He was the finance minister of France under Louis XVI. So he starts going after monopolies. He tries to get rid of all these important government positions where people were skimming money off the top. He cuts back spending, and he starts to push for free trade, getting rid of tariffs. They also put a single direct tax on land. But all of these reforms that he did was so unpopular that he gets replaced by Jacques Necker. Okay, Jacques Necker replaces Turgot, and he publishes the Compte Rendu, and this shows just how much money the government is wasting. So it shows where all the money is being spent, and again, it just further alienates the king from the people. So if you're trying to prove yourself to be a man of the people, this is something that just kind of pushes you outside of that. Of course, if they ever did that under Louis XIV, the people surely would have rebelled during that time period as well. The liberal phase of the French Revolution. Okay, you had the Cahiers de Doléances, a list of grievances uh, requested by Louis the XVI. Okay, and this is something that calls for tax equality, so that everyone paid their fair share of taxes, and the abolition of feudalism. Basically, an attempt to modernize France to what England was, and so some of their surrounding nations. In 1789, the Estates General, okay, uh, they didn't think it was fair the way that votes were being counted. They were 98% of the population, but they still only got one vote, with the nobles getting one vote and the clergy getting one vote. So uh, basically, they thought that at the very least their vote should be counted twice, since they counted such a large amount of the population. And a group called the Committee of 30 demands that, you know, you give more voting power to the third estate. Okay, and well, anyway, so the first and second state would not relent, and they tried to force the fact that they controlled basically everything that happened in in the Estates General. So, 2% controlling everything that happens is going to cause some problems. Okay. Abbé Sieyès is a clergyman who wrote What is the Third Estate? And they thought that basically you should get rid of all the nobles in the nation, because the Third Estate represented the actual will of the people, because it was 98% of the people. And so on June 17th of 1789, the Third Estate declares itself the National Assembly. By the way, if you're looking for an important question on the test, I would say this is one that you should probably be paying attention to. In fact, today is going to form the foundation of a lot of questions on your next test. Okay, so on June 20th, 1789, the new assembly goes to meet, and they find that they're locked out. And so they go and they meet in a local tennis court, and they take the tennis court oath. I don't know why I slurred that. And they promised to meet until a new constitution was written. Okay? And Louis XVI, in response to this large number of legislators getting together because they're so unhappy with the way that France is being administered, he raises an army to get rid of them, and he fires Necker, who was trying to reform things. Remember, he was the one who published just how corrupt Louis XVI was, and all this is going to do is cause more problems with the people. So, less than a month later, on July 14th, this is Bastille Day. This is a day that's really celebrated in France. Okay? So these crowds of Parisians march to the prison, which is also an armory. So there were a lot of weapons stored there as well. And when they get there, the defenders of the prison fired on the crowd. And as soon as the crowd pushes through and takes control of it, they behead all of the defenders of the Bastille. And so this event in itself, because now you have an armed mob, it saved the National Assembly, okay, because the army, remember, was being sent out to try and subdue them. And it also shows the power of mob violence. And by the way, whenever Paris is later on redesigned, the streets are redesigned in a way where it makes it harder for mobs of people to kind of push through like they did during the French Revolution. The Marquis de Lafayette, who we talked about last time, he becomes the head of the National Guard, and the idea is his job there is to protect the revolution. So you're going to see a lot of wealthy people overthrown and many of them killed, but there are some people that survive all of the different revolutions, and the Marquis de Lafayette is one of them. So the summer of 1789, okay, the Great Fear, okay. Who is in fear for their lives? That would be the wealthy. Okay, so peasants attacked manorial courts, okay, and noble manors. So all of these homes belonging to nobility start getting attacked. Okay, the National Assembly dismantles feudalism, takes away all the feudal privileges. The hunting rights, the tithe, labor service, and serfdom are ended. Also, the feudal taxes that were being paid to the nobility also gets destroyed at the same time. And people are running through, raiding everything, taking everything of value from these feudal manors, and killing, in many cases, the people that lived inside of these manors. So the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, they give legal equality, freedom of religion, and judicial rights to all of the people. And it's believed that it's just being put together for women. Okay? Olympe de Gouges, she attacks the belief that women did not want political rights. And she publishes her response to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens with the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and Female Citizen. And they demanded equal rights. But she gets ignored, and eventually she is guillotined in 1793. So, women's rights were a little bit harder to come by in France, and their punishment was a little bit more extreme. And she is guillotined solely in 1793 for being so radical as to say that women should have the right to vote. So, Olympe de Gauches, I salute you, and I am sorry that you are dead. Okay, the October days. Okay, so in October of 1789, and by the way, you're going to draw some parallels between this and the Russian Revolution, because it's the Russian Revolution that really leads to the death of the royals in the Russian Revolution and in the French Revolution. Okay, so the women of Paris, the Parisian women, they march on Versailles, they kill the guards, and they force the royal family to move back into Paris, back into the palaces there, where they can be watched and controlled. Okay, so by the end of 1789, in a short number of months, all of France's political systems were destroyed. There was a new government put in place with 83 equal departments, and they divided this into cantons and communes. And so basically, this was a way of administering control over all of the regions of France from a central location, and give more of a voice to all these different regions of France as well. And it really becomes a centralized national government overnight. And I know you're thinking, wow, what great change has happened in such a short period of time. But the truth is, this is only the beginning, and the chaos is really about to ensue. So we've reached the end of yet another day. I thank you once again for your patience. You've all been wonderful. I hope everyone's having a great day, and I will talk to you all soon. This is Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA, and I will see you on the other side. Oh, no cocaine, no AIDS, and no COVID. Sorry, I almost forgot. Hope no one did that in the few seconds before I warned.